Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to episode 9 of Screen 8. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to episode 8 of ScreenFlow Live. I'm Andrew Haley. I think why I get confused with that is because our Wirecast Live is like one episode ahead of ScreenFlow Live, or 2 episodes ahead or something. So, or maybe I'm just bad with numbers. Who knows? Anyway, I want to welcome you all this afternoon to another fine edition of ScreenFlow Live. I'm Andrew Haley, the product evangelist here at Telestream, and I'm happy to introduce to you the topic for today, which is going to be tiny tips for great screencasts. Basically, I was helping some people here around the office with ScreenFlow. We use it for a lot of the videos that we do and different projects, and just showing them little tips and tricks that I've picked up along the way. And they said, you know what, you should really share this with other people because I think, I found these really valuable. I'm sure that little things in and around ScreenFlow that you just might not know about are really helpful. So there continues to be tiny little controls that just make your life easier. I don't know them all. I'm still finding them out myself, but I do have a few things I can share with you. 1 or 2 workflow tips and some sort of settings and best practices for getting things set up to make your screencast go as smoothly as possible and your whole editing to production to distribution workflow just go a little easier. So hopefully you'll get some value out of today. It's just a tiny topic. We didn't want to try to bite off a huge chunk. I don't know how long this will take, but hopefully you'll find some value in it. We have comments here on the Facebook page. We do monitor those. I've got them right here on a different monitor so I can watch those and answer those as we go. I'm happy to take questions. Phil, to answer your question, this is the live broadcast. We are live right now, coming to you from the foothills of California at Telestream headquarters. So hopefully you are reading us and getting us loud and clear, and you can see everything we've got to show you guys today. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to jump in. If you have other questions or if you see anything that you are curious about or want to know more about, just leave a comment. And if you have any tips, please share them. I'd love to learn some things as well as we dive in. So without further ado, let's go check out my desktop here. All right, so the first thing I want to talk about is setting up your project, because I'm not even going to open ScreenFlow yet. There is a feature which Apple introduced a couple operating systems back, basically to try to make your lives easier. You might have noticed, if you've been a long-time Mac user, somewhere around OS X Mavericks, this thing happened to your documents, your applications. If you were working in iWork or Pages or a lot of other native Mac-friendly applications like ScreenFlow, you just didn't. You suddenly, instead of having a save or a save as and going through this whole saving process, it kind of changed to like duplicate, make a copy, move, like you could move it to a different folder. Basically what Apple introduced was this operating system level autosave, and any programs that weren't native on the Mac could now take advantage of that and make it so that the idea was that you didn't have to keep going to that file menu and hitting that save button or that save as button to constantly back up your work. They figured we'll just make it automatic, we'll run it in the background, and it'll make everyone's lives easier. Now, by and large, it did, and it was really neat when you can just quit a document and reopen a document and you're right where you left off, because the whole save process was automatically taken care of. But there are some exceptions to that. There's no such thing as a perfect one-size-fits-all solution. And so ScreenFlow customers, we began getting some reports from some of them that they were not happy with this new feature, because what ended up happening was they were working with sometimes hour-long videos or 2-hour videos, and this autosave feature was really slowing down the system because it had a ton. ScreenFlow projects were very large with large video files, and that took forever to autosave. And they were finding that it would freeze on them or crash, or just would take forever to do the smallest things. So we implemented a way for you guys to disable that autosave feature. And I want to stress this because it was stressed to me by Alex in our support department that this is not for everyone. You should not disable this. You know, I'm not saying that everyone should disable their autosave feature for ScreenFlow. And this is just specific to ScreenFlow. It's not going to turn off the whole autosave thing for the whole operating system or other programs. It's just targeting, just specific to ScreenFlow. But it's not for everyone. So let's talk real quick about who you are or who you should be if you either if you need to disable your autosave. So in general, and there could be exceptions or I could be leaving something out, but basically, if you're working with large ScreenFlow files, and they are at least a gig or more, or they are longer than 10 minutes or 5 minutes, you know, if they're getting in the realm of, you know, anything above a gig, you start getting in the realm where this might be a solution for you. If your ScreenFlow projects are typically 30 seconds or less, they're under a gig in size, then keep the autosave feature. It's totally worth it and can be very fast and helpful for you. But if you're working with longer files, large files, and longer projects, then you might want to consider disabling the autosave feature. If you work with an external hard drive, so you are someone who likes to store all of your content and capture all of your ScreenFlow content onto an external drive rather than your internal hard drive in the Mac, then you might want to consider autosave. The thing with autosave is Apple requires that autosave be backed up on the system drive. So if all of your content in your ScreenFlow project is captured to OneDrive, guess what's going to happen? The autosave will kick in and copy a whole file back to the internal hard drive. And then, you know, so you basically write everything to an external, the autosave kicks in, it just copies it back to the internal, and then when you save the file, you're now updating the external, and back and forth it goes. So that can really, really slow you down. So if you are a customer who primarily works with all your footage on external hard drives, then disabling the ScreenFlow autosave is probably a good idea. Let's see. External hard drives, large files. If you're noticing slowdown, which is usually caused by large files, external hard drives, but if you are noticing that it takes a long time to do the simplest things, this could be just related to processing power, but usually if you notice that it wasn't a problem in the past, or if you haven't really changed things and all of a sudden in the last version or two, it just feels like you know, you get the spinny beach ball more often than you should. If you notice freezes or slowdowns or anything like that, it could be the autosave kicking in and writing things. If you tend to bring in a lot of files or a lot of content from other sources, and you are, you know, large image files, large media files, and so forth, raw audio or uncompressed audio and the like, ProRes files, the autosave feature is probably a good one to turn off for you. So this does not cover people who just use short projects, quick files, 30 seconds or less than a minute or two, and it doesn't cover people who are not using a ton of video or a ton of screen capture. They might just be using ScreenFlow to generate annotations or little animations or files that really don't take up a ton of room, because most of that stuff is generated in the software itself, so their project files are very small. So you probably want to keep ScreenFlow's autosave on. All right, with that disclaimer out of the way, hopefully you know who you are that need this, and those of you who don't need it, with that in mind, let's go see how to turn off the autosave in ScreenFlow and save you some time from having to walk through it with our support team or by yourself. So first, what you're going to do is you're going to go to our website. There's a very easy step-by-step instruction in our knowledge base here. So if you go to our website, hover over the support tab at the top, drop down to the ScreenFlow knowledge base, click there. It's going to load up the knowledge base. You can now search in this field right here at the top and just search for autosave. One of the top results is going to be disabling autosave. So just click on that article. And here is a step-by-step tutorial on what to do and how to do it. Now, your version is going to be different. So the step you take or the command you write is going to be a little different for each version of ScreenFlow. So you can see here behind me, we've got version 3 through 6 covered. So find the version that you need to cover, or the ones that you have on your hard drive that you want to disable. In my case, I just have the ScreenFlow 6 here, and just start from step 1. So you're going to make sure ScreenFlow is closed or quit, which is why we're doing this first. You're going to open the terminal application. So just, in my case, I'm just terminal. And then use the following command to disable the autosave. So we're going to copy, just highlight this, hit Command C to copy it. And I can even just show you that, copy. And then we're going to tab back over to terminal. I'm going to zoom in here, and we're going to just paste that right into the field here and hit return. And if you did it correctly, then you don't get an error. It just took the command, and now the ScreenFlow disable autosave tool is in a Boolean state of yes, which means that it is currently active. So you've changed it from no to yes. To reverse this, you would simply do the same thing, and instead of yes, you would write no. All right, so pretty easy to flip it back on and off when you need to. And just keep that in mind. I'm going to turn it back on. And that is the ScreenFlow disabling of the autosave. Pretty straightforward, right? Take that command, write it right in there, and turn it on. Are there any questions about that? So Scott, you're asking, can I modify a long clip to be something like a Keystone Cops effect to shorten the clip? Yes, you can, and I can show you that. That's actually one of our tips for today. I hopefully will show you a pretty cool way to do that. Okay, so stay tuned here. Let's close the web browser for now. We don't need it. And we are now going to open ScreenFlow, and we're going to move on to our next power tip or tiny tip for today. And what I'm going to do for this tip in particular is we're going to, let's see. There is, I'm not sure if I can show you on camera. We're going to try here. Basically, we have a pretty slick little capture card that I wanted to demonstrate. This camera is coming in, let me pull this over a little bit, put it right back, see if I can show this on camera for you. It might not reach. So basically, this camera, maybe I do need to open the web browser so I can show you, because this cable's pretty tight. All right, I think the sides are cropped a little there. Can you put me full screen and see if we can get this in there? There we go. So we're going to pull this over right here. Okay. So this capture card is basically a little USB capture card. It's made by Magewell, so that's fine. I'll actually show them in a web browser because it's out of focus there. It's made by Magewell. It's got an HDMI feed coming in from this camera, which is a very nice camera made by Blackmagic Design called an Ursa camera. And it then goes to a USB 3 output and goes right into the Mac. And the nice thing is it doesn't require any drivers or any software to be installed. It just works with the native drivers on the Mac. And guess what shows up right in this capture video? So a lot of people wanted to use professional cameras with their, and obviously this looks blocky here, but this would be the quality that you would see in the final recording, is me and Laurent, not this the kind of fuzzy thumbnail. which is not showing you the full quality of the camera. A lot of people want to use professional cameras with ScreenFlow, and rather than just use their webcam, their built-in webcam. Now, with this capture card, you can do that. You can bring in a really nice camera or an HDMI source or even an SDA camera, and it should show up directly as a capturable source in ScreenFlow, just like your webcam. So that's really cool. It's going to up your game. If you have nice lenses, nice cameras, or DSLRs and so forth, you can start using them with a capture card like this, and it should just pop right in to ScreenFlow. We don't have an official hardware list or supported list of which ones we absolutely support and which ones we absolutely don't. So again, this one in particular is one that I'm testing and using, and I find it to work just fine. But we've shied away from saying, use these ones, don't use these ones, because we'd have to start doing a ton of testing. So I can tell you safely that this one, the XI100 USB, is working great for me. And it may not be the only one. We're looking at doing other ones, and there'll be more information coming about that. But this is a power tip, a tiny tip for you out there who are looking for something to try this one. And again, if you run into problems with this particular capture card, our support team, they're not doing a ton of testing. As I said, we don't formally have support, so they may not be able to help much if it either works or it doesn't. But I can say that I haven't had any issues with it. That doesn't necessarily mean you won't have issues, but I want to point that to people who might be interested in looking for a solution like that. So let's look at the capture card real fast online. And then you can kind of see it's about, I think it's about $300 or so. Let's type. So you're going to look for the Magewell XI100 USB. And you'll see this is what it looks like. It's a silver dongle. It's listed for $300. We'll just click here. Looks like you can even buy it at Walmart, which I did not know. It's pretty cool. And there it is. And they have two versions of it. They have one that's HDMI in, and they have one that is SDI in. So you would have to buy whichever one works for your camera. But they are pretty fantastic little guys. I'm very impressed with it, and I love the quality. And it can handle a ton of different frame rates, so it's a very versatile capture card. As long as you have USB 3 on your Mac, you should be okay to use this. I believe, obviously, you'd need one of the more recent operating systems as well. But check with the manufacturer on that if there's any questions. All right, any questions about that tip? Is there a way to use, so Phil's asking, is there a way to use the terminal to query the state of the autosave? So I don't know it. If there is, we could run a quick experiment. Obviously, if you haven't disabled it before, the state should be just what it was. So the last time we disabled it, we hit yes. And so it sounds like you're okay as long as you enter 2 commands in a row, right? So we've definitely ensured that if it wasn't, it is now. And if we do it again, it's going to be, it's going to do that. Now, I will ask our engineers if there's a way to actually just get a result or a response as to what the state is, but I don't know it if there is. But it doesn't have any issues. It doesn't seem to have any conflict with if it already was yes, writing yes. If it already was no, writing no again. You should be totally safe to do that. Good question. All right, so we talked about disabling autosave. We talked about this capture card, which is a good way to bring in nice cameras for your directly into ScreenFlow. This saves you, by the way, from having to record locally on the camera and then bring it in later and do all the file conversion that might be necessary. You can just capture direct into ScreenFlow and ScreenFlow editing format, so it'll save you time, a lot of time. All right, next up, let's talk about the next features or tiny tips that I would like to share. First is up in the preferences. There's a lot of little ones here. They're not that big a deal, but together they can add up and kind of save you some time. And again, these are preferences, so you may have a different or preferred way of doing it. So first that I like to do is I like to lower my countdown to about a timer of 3. I just don't really feel like I need that extra 5 seconds. You may like that 5 seconds. You may want longer, but set your countdown timer for whatever works for you. In my case, I like to shorten it just a little bit, save those extra 2 seconds, which I'm sure add up over time, right? Next, I like to keep this checked, but that's, I think that's new in 6. So if you prefer the old way of doing it, then uncheck this box, and the resizing and things and scaling things in the canvas will be the way they were in ScreenFlow 5 and prior. Next, the recording keys. So by default, the recording key is Command-Shift-2, I believe. I've never liked that command. It just doesn't work for me. It's just hard to remember. It's a lot of keys. The 2's way up there. It just didn't feel intuitive to me. I never really took to it. So I like to make it record, make it simple. I like to make it an R. So I use the Option R for my recording key. So now I can start a recording by hitting Option R. And I can stop a recording by hitting Option R. Another nice thing is I can, and I do the same thing with the pause key. There is by default no assigned hotkey, but to keep it simple, I just keep the Option key pressed down, and all these commands, which normally might be assigned to other keys without this modifier of the Option key, they can now be basically start with the letter of what they're doing. So Command R for record, or sorry, Option R for record, Option P for pause, and Option M for adding a marker. This I find makes it pretty easy to remember. So I just have one modifier key for all 3, and that's what I set mine to. But set yours to whatever makes sense for you, or whatever you prefer. Yours could just be 1, 2, and 3. Command-Shift-1, Command-Shift-2, Command-Shift-3, however you prefer to work. So let's start recording. And we will, actually what I need to do is stop recording. I'm going to discard that. I don't want to save it. I'm going to create a new recording. Go back to the configure menu here. We're going to do one from the camera. We'll do one from the desktop, and we will record audio from our Blue Yeti microphone. And there we go. We could do computer audio. I don't feel like we need to, so I'm just going to hit that. Hit OK. And I'm just going to be recording this for a little bit as we talk about a couple of the other preferences. So I'm just going to keep this running in the background, and then when we're all done, we will use this recorded footage as our editing thing. So while that's recording in the background, let's not worry about it for now. I'm going to just continue with talking about some of the preference settings that you should be aware of or should set if you haven't already. So the next stop in our preference tour and tip hotline here is the timeline tips, or the timeline preferences. So at the top here, I actually don't have any opinion on any of these. I generally, because they've never been checked, I've never gone in and checked them, but you may prefer those. What I like to set in here is if I know I'm not going to be working with a lot of tracks, I like to make sure that my default is large. I like to work with larger track sizes, but that's just a default. The other thing I like to set in here is the still image duration. And I believe by default, the still image duration is 5 seconds, which generally is not a bad length. It's actually pretty good. I like to work with them about 5 seconds. But sometimes it's not long enough, and I'll come in and I'll set it to 10 seconds. And that gives me a lot of time, especially with large images. If I'm animating them through, I can pan across them kind of like a Ken Burns style effect, and that gives me lots of room on the timeline to do it without having to manually drag out the ends to make those clips or images longer on the timeline so I have enough room to work with. The other thing I find is the freeze frame, again, is 2 seconds is generally too short. I set that to 5 for myself. Go through this list and set any of the ones that you think you might use or need for a time that you prefer. Default transition's another good one. I generally like a 2-second transition as my default, but you might prefer a shorter. I can always shorten them, but I often find that I'm lengthening more often than I'm shortening. Maybe that's just because I'm a bad editor. I don't know. Who knows? That's all preference and style. So do what works for you, the style that you're comfortable with. No tips here. This is nothing that I would really, obviously this is some space saving stuff. So you can, if you've got video magnification, it smooths out the pixels rather than keeps them super sharp. You may prefer that look. And then adaptive versus lossless. Adaptive is going to save you space on your hard drive, and in general, I find that it looks just fine. But if you really, really, really want to keep the optimal pristine quality and you're working with shorter clips, you might want to work with lossless. If you're working with long captures or long projects, then you'll fill up your hard drive pretty fast with lossless. And adaptive's no slouch either. It does, it does the work to make sure that the quality is going to stay nice for you. So don't think it just because it's going to take up less space that it's really all that much less quality. Alrighty, next, Capture Scratch. This one is for you who have an external hard drive. This is a great one to change if you've just disabled the auto feature. So if you have an external hard drive and you want to start using it to record all of your ScreenFlow files and large capture sessions, then this combo of the external scratch with the disabling of the ScreenFlow autosave really can't be beat. That's kind of one of the major reasons to have it disabled in the first place. All right, and that completes our tour of the preferences, and I'm going to stop the record with my handy shortcut, Option R, and that's going to launch this new project window. All right, so we're going to stop just there for a second and check in on you guys for comments or questions. Scott and Phil, I'm glad to see you guys are watching, and hopefully you're getting some value out of this. So let me just go back here. It looks like, Scott, you had another question. Is there a way to schedule a screen recording to start 2 hours from now, like a webinar when I'm out? Absolutely. If you didn't know about it, let me show you it. Head up to Configure Recording, and you'll see this in the Configured Recording. You'll check the devices you want to record. So if you're just recording your whole screen and your computer audio for, say, a webinar or something, or like this broadcast, you just want to keep a local copy and you're not going to be around for the broadcast. You just set it. That's a little tricky because in general, Facebook creates the stream itself, once we start streaming. So, but that being said, things like this could be anticipated. So click on this second little pane here, and you'll slide over into our timer settings. We have a couple options for you. In general, you could start the recording to, actually, no, it has to be manually set, but what you can do is if you know you're going to be back at a certain time, you can set ScreenFlow to record in a loop. And so it will just toss, and if you know the webinar is going to be about 2 hours or an hour, say, most webinars are about an hour, you could set it to record in a loop for 1 hour and say 15 minutes. Just knowing when you're going to be back, okay? So you're going to set it to start recording, and then you'll tell it to stop recording after 2 hours, so depending on when the time is or whatever, stop recording after, whenever you're going to be, you think the webinar is going to end approximately. So if you think the webinar starts at, say, well, right now, let's say it's 3 o'clock, it's 3:10, but for convenience, let's assume it's 3 o'clock right now, and the webinar is supposed to start at 4 o'clock. And you would assume it's going to go till about 5 and maybe a little after, and then it's going to be over. And you'll be back sometime between 5:30 and 6. So what you're going to do is it's going to start in about an hour, and you want it to stop recording after you're going to do 2 hours and let's say 90 minutes. So 2 hours and another half hour. So let's stop recording after, doing the math in my head, that'd be 120, 150 minutes. Okay. And then in 150 minutes, it's only going to keep the last, so you might want to set this to an hour and 30. Okay. So if I did that right, that's 90 minutes. It's going to record a 90-minute loop, and then it's going to buffer itself for another 90 minutes, record another buffer for the last. So it's going to keep the last 90 minutes, and you can start it now, and it would record, and then it's just going to keep the last 90 minutes of footage. So then if you're back at 5:30, say on the dot, it should keep if I did this right, then because the units aren't the same, so it makes it a little confusing. You can basically, it should just stop the recording, and you should keep the last 90 minutes. So between the record in a loop setting and the stop recording after setting, or set the timer, you can then kind of predict when ScreenFlow will stop recording and how much back in time it will do it. The trick is you're not setting a time for it to begin recording from a state of non-recording. You are just hitting the record button and walking away from the computer, knowing that it's going to keep just the last 90 minutes. And as long as you're back within 90 minutes of the event beginning, then you should be covered. If you don't think you'll be back within 90 minutes, then set the loop for longer and do it, say, keep the last. Actually, no, let's do this. It should stop recording. So if you're doing it at 4 p.m., doing all this in my head. So it starts, you're going to start at 3, you're going to get an hour, then the event starts. So that's 60 minutes. And then it should go for another hour beyond that, give or take. And then just to be safe, so that's 120, we built in an extra 30 minutes. And so it's going to stop recording at, 5:30. And you want it to keep the last 90 minutes. So that should be right, if I got it all right. So just double checking my math there. And then you can hit go and walk away from your computer as long as it's 3 o'clock, right? And that is kind of the way you would do that. Now, of course, you need to make sure you have 90 minutes of hard drive space for your recording. If you don't have that, then that feature is not going to work for you. Does that answer your question? It's a little complex, but I hope now ScreenFlow is kind of on an autopilot, and it's just going to be recording, and it dumps the last anything outside of that 90-minute window. All right, cool, Phil. I'm glad. I hope, it was a little complicated there, but we got through it. All right. So that is the record in a loop feature and the timer feature. ScreenFlow 5 had the timer feature, but it didn't have the record in a loop. So you could, in the same scenario, leave, start recording at 3 o'clock, get back at 5:30, and your webinar, and then and tell it to stop recording at 5:30. You're just going to have 2.5 hours of footage as opposed to 90 minutes of footage. So that's the nice thing about that record in a loop. You won't fill up your hard drive, and you only keep the amount of footage that you want. Okay, couple other tips that we wanted to talk about. So the first, and I think I talked about this in a previous episode, but audio is a big deal, right? So the first thing I do is I usually come in and because I don't want to start chopping up my clip and then go back and do a batch apply all, I like to just process the audio first so that I know what I'm dealing with. So I'll usually hit the smooth volume levels, and that will give ScreenFlow time to come through and make sure that the volume is appropriate. By the way, let me remember to turn off ScrubLive audio so it's not annoying if I'm scrubbing around in the timeline like this. And the other thing I do is I will typically turn on ducking, particularly if this is my narrative track and I want the audio to just automatically dip. 10% I've generally found is good, so that I don't really have an issue with. And then I sometimes will throw on the remove background noise, but I get mixed results with this. And I think I said in a previous episode I typically do between 30 and 50. Sometimes even that 30 is too much, and I just find that I can't get it sounding the way I want it with almost any amount of background removal, so I will just uncheck that sometimes. So it's an either or sometimes with the remove background noise. That's pretty much it for what I do with audio, but I'd like to do that up front. So now I know all the clips I'm working with are consistent. I'll then usually listen to the whole thing. So we're not going to listen to the whole thing, but I am going to listen to a portion of it just so we can get a sense of how it sounds with these adjustments. So this is one of those clips that, and you're not going to hear that audio very well. We can boost it on the board, but it's going to sound pretty quiet to you. I've got it up as high as I can go over here. Deborah Lee, if you want to boost on the board, you can. It just might bring up the noise floor. There might be a little bit of a hum or a hiss. It's not long enough, and I'll come. And that a lot of times large. So this clip is a really good candidate by my ears for background removal, and that's partly because I'm using this microphone, which is just an omnidirectional. It's on an omnidirectional setting, and it's going directly into the computer, and it's picking up all the hums of the whirring of in the studio and so forth. We've got a projector up there. We've got certain things. It's a noisy studio, and this guy is getting a lot of it. And there's a general background noise to this clip that's embedded in the sound. So I would definitely shoot for some audio removal on this. I'm not gonna really dial it in right now, but let's just throw that on there. And it's at 15% to start. Let's see how that sounds. So not bad again. I might add a little more. I just don't, I'm not going to really dial it in, but that seemed to help a little. One thing it did was it had a little bit of a dampening effect. So throwing on a presence effect might be a good one to add in as well. The presence effect is right here, and that just really brings the microphone feeling of the person talking closer to the microphone. There's a huge distance because I was talking. My primary microphone is here on my right here, and that's what you're hearing me from. The distance from the microphone to my mouth is not far, and you feel very close. My voice feels very present to you, just as if we're having a conversation in a small room or something. This microphone placement's very different and is very far from me, and clearly it sounds like that. I sound distant from the microphone. So effects like presence can really help bring that feeling of closeness to the audio. So let's hear how that sounds. I believe by default, I'm just upping the presence. And with most sliders, again, I think this is something most people will figure out, but with sliders, I find that triangulation is best. I usually go to one extreme and then the other, so I get a sense of the difference. If there's really no difference from one end to the other, then this is probably not an effect or a slider you need to be messing with, because it's just not doing anything. And so getting a kind of a triangulation, and then once you've got an idea of what the two extremes are, finding where the balance is, where it tips from being a good thing into a bad thing. And so that's where sliding, and you just dial it in and you listen again, you dial it in, and that's how I work, and I'm sure most of you probably do the same, but I recommend that. That helps me anyway. So that's another little workflow tip that I've learned just about myself anyway. Pretty good, but sometimes not too bad. There's other things we might do. You could try some of the other effects here and go with the small room thing rather than presence. You could deepen the bass. I tend to have a little bit of a higher voice, so making it a little bit richer, emphasizing the lower tones might not be a bad thing for my voice. So anyway, take it for what you will, but that's how I would deal with some audio. You don't want to get too trapped in the weeds with audio. You want to make sure it sounds good and clear and people can understand you, and then I think move on. Otherwise, you could spend days and days and days just working on the audio alone, getting it the way you want it, and then you haven't even started editing really yet. Editing, but you haven't started chopping together the piece. All right, so next, I did want to cover audio processing and kind of what I do to clips. The next thing that we talked about, and this goes back to the question that you had, Scott, about the Keystone Cops effect. I assume you're talking about a speed up effect. So let's just look at, now I'm going to turn off the audio. We're actually going to detach it. I'm just going to, that way we don't even have to worry about the chipmunk effect happening. And we're just going to deal with the video here. And we can speed it up. There are a couple ways to do this. One is by double-clicking the clip, and that will pop up the clip inspector window, which is a useful one and has a speed slider, so you can use that. That's no big deal. It's going to tell you if the clip is slowing down, and if how the duration is changing. It's going to tell you how it's speeding up. Okay, so that's a great way to work. But there's, I think, a faster way. And this was taught to me by Andy Orsow, who's another ScreenFlow power user. We did an interview with him a few months ago, and we'll be airing that interview with either on here or posting it as well. So you should look for that coming up soon. But this is a cool tip, and I didn't even know about it till he told me. And so if you hold down your Option key while hovering on the edge of the clip, normally without that, you just have this icon with the two arrows pointing in either direction, and you can shorten or lengthen a clip, not in its speed or overall duration, but by actually chopping. It's the same as if you use the T key, split that clip there, made it end there, and then deleted the chunk on the end. You haven't permanently deleted anything. It's non-destructive, so you could make it come back by just growing it out again, by dragging it to the right. So nothing wrong with that. But this other option, that doesn't speed up or slow down the clip. Holding the Option key turns your cursor, actually just augments your cursor with a tiny little clock icon right below it. And now, if you are to drag to the left or right, you'll see you are now speeding up or slowing down the clip. And you'll get a little handy overlay that's going to tell you not only what is the new duration of the clip, so 3 minutes, 37 seconds versus, so forth. It's also going to tell you the new speed parameters. So you're slowing it down by a certain amount or you're speeding it up. Really cool tool, because now you don't have to go into this slider and operate it all from up here. You're just editing right on the timeline and speeding up or slowing down the clip. I absolutely love that feature. Now we should get a very keystone copsy effect if we pull it full screen, if we play the whole thing back at such a high speed. And I'm just going to be for a little bit as we talk about a perfect, right? Running in the background, and there we go. I am now moving at, well, let's see, what's the speed at? 351% speed. So quite an increase, moving a bit faster. And that's your Keystone Cops effect, Scott. Hope that helps. All right, guys, I think that's all we had planned for today. Hope those were some cool, tiny tips for you. There's definitely lots more we could cover, and I'll think of some more to share with you in a future broadcast. For now, if you do have one you'd like to share with us, please leave it in the comments section or post a ScreenFlow video of it. That's a great way to teach others how to use ScreenFlow. We hope, to see you again next week, same time here at 2:30 Pacific time. And please keep screencasting. And thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.